You're listening to WCOM LP 103.5 FM Carborough and Chapel Hill. It's a Tuesday, it's 5 o'clock, and that only means one thing. It's time for another round of Snarky Faith with your host, Stuart Deloney. This is a space where we irreverently wrestle through life, culture, and spirituality, all with our heads in the clouds, our tongues in our cheeks, our hearts in our sleeves, and our feet on the ground. At Snarky Faith, the questions or even the answers are never the point. It's all about the conversation. So here's your host, Stuart Deloney.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to another round of Snarky Faith Radio. I'm your host, Stuart Deloney, and welcome again here another week to Snarky Faith. Oh, man. So much to talk about this week. I'm excited about this show today. The bulk of our show is going to center around a conversation I had with author and pastor Brandon Carlton. We'll talk about his book, Meaningful Again, How One Pastor Questioned Everything and Found Comfort in Uncertainty. So we'll be talking about deconstructing in faith in the second half of our show today. It's a fun conversation. Brandon's a cool guy that I'm really glad I got to know. But before we get to that, I want to talk about so many things this week with you guys. And one of them, this is a totally stupid thing that I've added into my life, and I tell you this because it brings me this weird amount of joy. And as we're living in the world at bated breath, waiting for Uncle Mueller to give us a phone call about what's up in the Capitol, we kind of are in a situation where you look for joy where you can find it in life. And yes, of course, I find joy in my wife and my family and all that kind of stuff. But I'm talking about like existential joy that's like outside your house type of a thing, in your purview. And I read a lot of news. I read a lot of news for the show. I read a lot of news just because apparently I'm just obsessed with figuring out what's going on in the world and how it's all going to end. Not really. Kind of. Not really. And I use this app on my iPad called Smart News. And it's like it's an app that aggregates a bunch of news sources together. So you can pick different topics like politics and entertainment and things of that nature. And you see like an aggregation of sources, which is really great because I one thing when I try to educate myself about what's up with things of that nature, like things of the political persuasion, I like to try to read stuff from the far left to the far right and everything in between, just so I have an informed perspective on what I'm talking about. And in this app, the fun thing you can do is you can pick different channels to add stuff into it. And I decided just for fun to be able to add one on Christian news because I regularly read through Christian news, even though I read it with more of a negative, snarky, sarcastic bent. And this has been such a fun, joyful treasure trove of wonderment because really what it is, this tab isn't really all of like religious news or all of Christian news. It's Christian news from like the conservative ilk. And I'm just going to say it makes me happy and makes me smile every morning as I sit and I just kind of sarcastically read through this and laugh like an idiot. And I want to give you an example. And I was aware of this. And they have really just turned me on in so many ways to a magazine that I knew about that existed before, a magazine and a website. But I don't know. But I have a newfound love in Charisma magazine. That is for the spirit-filled conservative Christian. And Charisma brings you so many wonderful daily doses of their own warped lens. Yes, and if you're new to this show, FYI, the show is called Snarky Faith. So yes, so I'm loving this in the most sarcastic of terms, and I wanted to share one of these, and this is literally a news article that they have in there: biblical ways to recognize the Antichrist and evade his deception. Because of course, this is handy stuff. If there is an Antichrist, I do want to be able to recognize him and evade his deception, because oftentimes there's people out there that want to just evade his deception, and there's others that just want to recognize him. But really, just what needs to happen in this is they both have to come together if you're going to resist whatever it is we're resisting. And yes, these are for those that may not be so schooled in Christianese. What we're talking about here is the end times insanity, crazy portion of Christianity that continues to look towards the end with this weird, jubilant, morbid obsession that's tinged with kind of glee because all this bad stuff's gonna happen, but Jesus comes back. So, it's kind of that sense of feeling when it comes to these folks. And so yeah. So here's what I want to give you. I just because again, the show is about really arming you brothers and sisters out there, in order for you to be able just to resist the devil and all of his evil wiles that he has, how he ensnares you and takes you and tears you down. So yeah. I mean, who doesn't want to know the biblical ways to recognize the Antichrist and evade his deception? Yep. So here they are. I'd add a drum roll here, except the entire quote unquote news article is really just a very long, elaborate advertisement for a new book called Decoding the Antichrist and the End Times. That's published by who? Charisma House. But they're talking about this in Charisma Magazine. Could there be a connection? But come on, I want to know. I need to know the ways to avoid and evade deception. Well, okay, if I'm worried about end times, then I'll just scroll down a little further on their website. Oh my gosh, I see something else that's wonderful in here. Are Alexa, Siri setting the stage for the Antichrist's worldwide domination? Oh my gosh, click on it. Let's see what's happening. And we're getting another article here about decoding the Antichrist and end times by Mark Blitz, set to be released by Charisma House. Wait a second. I'm starting to sense some sort of pattern here. Has the Antichrist actually come and taken over Charisma Magazine and turned it into just this big bait and switch scheme that really just tries to ensnare the how do we put this? Let's see. The spiritually foolish of all of us, or we could say the those that line up to buy health tonics that will cure all things, those that like to be tricked and victimized and deceived by holy men, those that are gullible and foolish but love anything that talks about the end times. Oh my goodness, Charisma Magazine is for you. And like we've learned from the granddaddy of all BS within Christianity, Jim Bakker, that pretty much, I mean, really, so here's like one of my street smarts rules to live by Stuart and Snarky Faith here. I would essentially just say if the main purpose of the ministry is selling you things, it's not a ministry, it's a business, people. What? That sounds so funny. So actually, that was just a long aside here. But really, I think that you would like to go and see Charisma. It's charismamag.com. I mean, it's a wonderful treasure trove of just crazy takes on the news, and also just wonderful bait and switch ways to be able to steal your money and sell you books that you don't need to know. Because right now I'm just terrified and really just considering clicking buy when it comes to biblical ways to recognize the Antichrist and evade his deception, and also how we can really, apparently the Antichrist has something to do with Siri and Alexa. Man, the world is absolutely going to hell. That settles it. Someone needs to start a ministry to evangelize Alexa and Siri. So someone out there listening right now, write that down. That is, God may be calling you to start a ministry to be able to evangelize AI, because that seems very kingdom glorifying. Seems like a God thing there, especially so the Antichrist won't use Siri and Alexa to deceive all of us or whatever. Now, the world may be going to hell But you know one reason it's not going to hell? Because of our president. Our favorite president. Donald J. Trump. Oh, such a man of God. I mean, he's a terrific man of God. Like, if it weren't for Trump, I mean, who knows the state that our country would be in? People may be out on the streets. They may be happy. They may be going about their daily lives. But no. If the world is going to hell, Donald Trump is certainly giving us a taste of that hell. And according to folks like folks at Charisma Magazine, or the man, the myth, the charlatan, the felon, the alleged rapist, the list goes on and on, Jim Bakker. I'm going to go ahead and give Jim Bakker some time here on the show, because we like to. He's a friend of the show. Friend of the show in the most snarky sense ever. Really, we just like having Jim's voice on the show from time to time, just for laughs. And in a little segment that we like to call the Christian Crazy of the Week. So here we go.
Lord have mercy. The Lord is my shepherd. He know what I want.
So this week's soundbite from the Jim Bakker Show is brought to us by Right Wing Roch. And just giving you a little setup, you could probably like create a drinking game for this short clip that we're going to have. Essentially, probably a drinking game for how many times Stuart stops it to make a snarky comment, because it's really hard for me to just let it flow out in its entirety. But this is Jim Bakker talking about how many times President Trump has been saved. He's like so saved. He's like super saved. Like, yeah, he's more saved than the average saved person. So, yeah. So the clip begins with a snippet from the State of the Union, and then just begin to listen to the magic, because you know I'm going to hop in at some point because I just have to. So here we go.
All children, born and unborn, are made in the holy image of God.
Do you realize what strength, and we call it guts, it takes to say what that man just said? Mm-hmm. Presidents don't talk that way anymore because they have to appease everybody.
So here Jim's really just giving us the truth, like the true news, the truest of news, that, you know, other presidents had this idea of like decorum and this way of speaking that apparently didn't piss everybody off, or wasn't racially insensitive or hateful, or you know, whatever Trump does. But I will agree here with Jim that, you know, Trump has a lot of gut. He has a lot of gut. I mean, look at the dude. He has a lot of gut. I mean, I have a lot of gut. I mean, look at me. But Trump, if we're talking about presidents with guts, I mean, there's him, and then there's probably Taft that have more gut. A lot of gut going on here. But yeah, I the part that makes me laugh is, you know, a lot of presidents wouldn't say the things that he says. Yes, because a lot of presidents aren't hateful and bigoted with the vocabulary of a fifth grader, and have like onset dementia that was brought on by extreme narcissism. You're right, Jim. He's one of a kind. So go ahead, Jim. Just continue on this blessed whatever the hell you're saying.
Right.
But he wants to please God.
Yes.
Now, here's one thing I'm going to say about the president. You know, he's not perfect. None of us are perfect. But he is being taught and mentored and prayed with more than probably any president in the history of the United States of America.
That's right.
When he flies, he has pastors with him. When he's in the White House, he has pastors with him. I personally know people who have led him to Christ.
Yeah.
He's been saved so many times.
I love it. Oh.
That I'll tell you what, if it counts, he's got more numbers than anybody I know of. And I'm serious.
Jim is very serious here. And when Jim gets serious, like very serious, it's time to take note, because really what he's laying out here for all of us to see is he's like the Trump is the most presidentially president like of all time. Like he's the Christian of all Christians. I mean, he's literally been saved more than any person possible, except for, why does he keep needing to get saved over and over again? Is it like not taking Or is it just that it takes a lot to get through that, like, spray on tanner, like that sometimes, that keeps like the spirit away? Or is it just the cheeseburgers? They just like the spirit just kind of slides off him. I'm not exactly sure like what it does, but in the history of presidents and doing just amazing things, because we know this, like there's no other president that has done more and whatever we wanted. It's just so hard getting caught up in this BS storm of greatness at this moment here. But yes. I mean, any good Christian knows that the leader that we most want to have is the one who's been saved the most. That makes him the most Jesus-y because he's been saved so I it's even hard to keep up with the sarcasm here. I don't even know what the hell this means. I don't even know what he's talking about here in this, that somehow that, yes, more saved equals more spiritual. Sure. Jim, just go ahead and finish. Good Lord, Jim, just keep talking. Go ahead.
I'm serious, and I could name the people who prayed with him.
Yeah.
And he honors God.
Yeah.
He lets the preachers come in and lay hands on him.
In the Oval Office. That's right.
And they do. You do not know James Robinson like I know James Robinson.
Wow.
He doesn't stop. He won't stop. He has no fear.
Right.
And so, and he is one of them that led the president to the Lord Jesus Christ.
Amen.
He's one of them.
Hallelujah.
But he's just one of them.
That is great. We want the president surrounded by men that don't take no for an answer. That when someone says no, that there's no consent here, that these men in the president's circle, they just keep pushing. I mean, praise to the spirit of Matt Lauer. Whoa, these men that won't quit. They won't stop. And, I mean, spiritually, they've done this. And this comes from like the Psalm of Donald, that you just got to grab them. You got to go in there and grab it, right? Grab it. In the spirit, of course. We're talking about spiritually speaking here, right? Right. Spiritual consent. Spiritual consent's what we're getting at here.
But they were leading him and guiding him and preparing him, nurturing him through it all. And so there is a Daniel's company, and it's so big. This is probably one of the basic reasons why there's miracles coming out of the White House and why there's a miracle in America.
This is truly amazing that there are miracles just coming out of the White House. There's a miracle happening in America. I think I missed that part. What are we talking about here? I got so caught up in my own little snarky diatribe. Miracles? White House? What, Jim? I don't even know what you're talking about. Oh, you crazy kook. And also for my little diatribe before about consent, I just need to repeat this here. This is a show called Snarky Faith, and there is very thick sarcasm going on here, especially during the Christian crazy. So yeah. If you were offended by what I was saying, it's meant to be sarcastic. Or if you're conservative and you're offended, that's exactly what it was meant to do. Great. So just as long as we've cleared all of that stuff up, let's get on to the meat of our show, where I get to sit down with Pastor Brandon Carlton. And just like I'd mentioned before, if you are a conservative listening to the show, hey, welcome. You're always welcome to come and hate listen to the show. I love it. So you are welcome here to sit in here and get enraged. And our next interview may not help that either, because we're gonna dive deep into what the process of doubt and deconstruction looks like as a pastor walks through it in his journey of faith. So here we go. Brandon Carlton is a pastor from Rock Island, Illinois, where he pastors Connection Quad Cities. Brandon has written the book Meaningful Again, How One Pastor Questioned Everything and Found Comfort in Uncertainty. Welcome to the show, Brandon. Thank you for being here today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Well, Brandon, as we kind of hop into this, as I was reading through your book, and what happens a lot of times, I begin to see more and more of my story in your story, and I just start outlining things. I'm like, oh, that's good. Oh, been there, done that. As I'm going through that, and I wanted you to really kind of give us a little bit of a snapshot of your background and what led up to you writing this book.
So I grew up, or as I say, I was, been going to church since I was in the womb. Actually, my mom likes to tell a story of when she was on the church softball team, playing third base, diving for ground balls when she was pregnant with me. But yeah, so I throughout from day one through the end of high school, I attended a really conservative evangelical church. It was pretty healthy church culture, all things considered, but it was your traditional evangelical paradigm. You always vote Republican. You believe the Bible is the literal, like, historical truth. You don't believe in evolution. Like, it was all those standard evangelical things. And then after high school, I became friends with somebody who was a pastor in the Assemblies of God denomination, and I started through that friend, I started like kind of training to be a pastor. I eventually was a co-pastor at a youth group with him, and then from there I went and got an actual job at another church after I had met my wife, and we moved and went to another church that was kind of similar to Assemblies of God, which, if you aren't familiar with that, it's kind of just like a loosely Pentecostal based. It's not like a over the top Pentecostal church, but yeah. So then I was a pastor as technically I still had to have a full-time job. I lived for free on the church property. Other than that, it was I wasn't paid. So we were quote unquote volunteer pastors there, doing the youth ministry and doing the college ministry, of course, everything else. Worship team. We helped run the coffee shop. We led Bible studies. I mean, we were at the church 4 or 5 nights a week. And yeah, so we were volunteer pastors there for about 2 years, 2 or 3 years. Well, actually, longer. Sorry, I'm thinking about where we got married in the middle of it. So 2 years before we got married, and then 2 years after we got married. So we were there around 4 years, and we had a bad experience there. Ultimately, had which I won't go into, but yeah. And so we left that church, and we didn't know what to do next. And that process of leaving that church, where we were pastors at for 4 years, it started us down the path of asking a lot of questions, which then made me want to dream up of a new way of doing church. And I'm very analytical as it is, so I was analyzing all the different aspects of church that I liked, that I didn't like, and I was like, okay, I'm going to take those pieces and try to create something new. And now that's been about a 5-year journey in itself, where I've been working with a friend of mine named Jason. Me and him were co-pastoring this church called Connection, and yeah, so the book is about that 4 or 5 year journey of trying to reimagine what church might be able to look like.
It was what I liked about going through your journey in this, and I know like you breezed over this a little bit, but you worked in those years kind of as a pressure cooker. When you're kind of a situation when you're in a church, and I have been there, where you are either not paid or barely paid and still expected to do all of this, because I mean, we're told this over and over again. Come on, you're doing this for the Lord. This is a higher calling. Burnout is a spiritual virtue, or something like that, And my hat's off to you for the fact that you guys figured it out a lot quicker. I feel like it took me many, many years of walking through this and, going like, if I only switch tribes, like, let me just, because I again, like you, like I grew up in like a conservative evangelical Southern Baptist persuasion, and then did that for a little while, hopped over to the like more Pentecostal route. Let's try the Foursquare folks, and they're a fun bunch as well too. New name, same crap. Is kind of what ends up happening. And, we may package it differently, but still the same unhealthy situations continue to reign over and over again. We would hope that the church would be a place to be able to find meaning and to find relevancy and to find honesty amongst people. And it's quite the opposite.
Yes. It is very quite the opposite. A lot of my church experience, and so by the way, the church that we were volunteer pastors that we had a bad experience that caused us to deconstruct. That was a Foursquare church.
Oh,
So
high five! Yes, we
yeah,
are.
so we share that bond. Yeah.
I don't, it's as much of a bond as it is saying that you've like survived a prison shower. That's kind of, but yes,
Yeah.
we can at least kind of nod and be like, yeah, we've been there. Go.
Yeah. But yeah, there is very, it was not life-giving at all. My experience there, it was very draining. It was very, so I've actually been listening to a couple different podcasts on, like, not intentionally for this reason, but they're about cults. And everything that I'm listening to in this cult sounds real, or they're talking about these cults, it sounds really familiar. The ways that they would manipulate us to do things, and like you said, it's a higher calling, or we're doing it for the Lord. We would get a lot of, if you can't handle this responsibility, then why would we give you more? Mm-hmm. That was the common phrase, and so it was like, oh, okay, I better do a good job with this responsibility. And so they would give us more responsibility, but when they would say things like that, we would think, oh, more responsibility means a salary eventually, but it wasn't. It was just more and more and more and more responsibilities with no more salary. So yeah, it was very much and then after we left there too, we started, okay, where are we gonna, we took a couple months off from attending church, and then we were like, let's go try to find another. We felt all the guilt and shame of not attending every Sunday, so we started looking for another church. And every church that we would visit, we felt more and more like outsiders as time went by, and we felt more and more like we had to pretend to be someone we weren't. And a lot of that looked like pretending to be happy. We would walk into these churches and we're like, oh wow, like we're in a season of, we're in a low place right now, where we're in a season of depression and a season of grief and of mourning. And every church that we walk into, there's just no room for that. There wasn't room for us to be in a bad place. It was kind of like, get your act together. That was kind of the general attitude, like, be positive, smile, even when you don't feel like it. If someone said, hey, how you doing? Of course, you have to say, doing good. If you say, I'm not doing very good today, we would try that and people would look at us weird. But yeah, that experience was, that church shopping, quote unquote, I hate that term, but that church shopping experience was really eye-opening to us.
It is. Now, you mentioned too that what I love, what happened to you, and it's probably happened to me way too much in my life too, is there's probably moments where I should have just walked away from everything and just said screw it, but there was always something that kind of kept me like hanging around. And you go through this process of deconstruction. And on a side note, I did want to ask you about this. So in the book, you begin to talk about how you went to it was a conference in Florida, and you kind of go to this conference, and it's a big show. It kind of makes you sick to your stomach.
Yeah.
And in the book, you were very graceful in not saying what conference it was. And I just wanted to ask you, is it exponential?
Oh my gosh, I feel bad. I don't know. I'm not going to remember the name of it.
Okay, but yes.
It's a church planning.
I have been to that, and because I'm reading this and I'm going, this has to be exponential, because I have been to this, and this was like the biggest, like masturbatory, like let's worship other pastors, so someday we will be these pastors kind of convention. Yes, and yes, I went to that, and I remember going like, this makes me never want to pastor and never want to go to church ever again. And my wife and I we were down there with a bunch of other people, part of a denomination, and I think after like day one, I just told her, I was like, "Hey, we're out of town. Let's just stop going. Let's just go and hang out and have good conversations and talk, because otherwise, I just get angry when I'm in these, and then I start deconstructing in my head like what is wrong with everything here, and it's impossible for me to listen. And so so we end up like having these things, and I was like, But what I love that, so you're mentioning this conference, and then you mentioned you stumbled onto this wily Irishman. Yes, Pete Rollins, who has been on our show a while back. Awesome. Pete is a wonderful human being. He has been in my house for a brief moment and had a beer once. Oh wow! And we had him in town for an event, and it was super fun. And Pete is very much like who he is when he writes too.
That's awesome.
I've met many people that are very different than who they perceive themselves to be. But Pete was also part of our story of just learning to doubt and being okay with that.
Yeah.
So I wanted you to talk about your journey too of deconstruction and reconstruction. Going through, and it's a process that I think that lots of people are going through now. I mean, I think we're at a place, especially in America, where the church is becoming less and less. It less and less resembles Jesus, and it more and more resembles like a corporation or an institution. And people are making that decision to just say screw it and walk away. But there are some that are hanging around saying, "But wait, what if we did this differently?" And as a person that has done deconstruction, I want you to talk through some of this, because also you would articulate things better than I do on paper, and talk about that process, like the good, the bad. How do you walk into a process of deconstruction?
Yeah, well, first I want to say that feeling of, screw it all, let's walk away from it. I had that feeling just 3 days ago. I still have that sometimes, depending on the day and the week. But yeah, so my experience of deconstruction, it started off simply with the way that church is done. So what is asked of church leaders and what is asked of like volunteers, it's really a word that was really like a buzzword for me early on in the process was the church machine. Like it's this machine that we have to keep feeding. We have to keep. That conference was all about how to feed the machine and how to keep it running. At the time, had a church in my apartment. That was me and my wife and maybe like 10 other people. And we had been doing that for a year. And I was really content with that. And then I went to that conference and I didn't see anybody on stage that was a church of 10 people. It was, a churches of 10,000, as if that was the only way. And so that was that conference really made me start thinking about different ways that are unhealthy aspects, I would say, of the Western evangelical model of church. And through that, when you start asking those questions, you actually then start getting to the theology underneath those questions. And you start realizing, why is it that, so for example, like you said, I don't want to necessarily get into like a theological debate about this, but tithing, the way that it is in 2019, is not a biblical concept. That is not anything that was, first of all, there were no churches the way that they are now today. So there was no, real way to, I don't know. Anyway, so that, you start looking at like, oh, it's really uncomfortable and awkward, and it feels like they're manipulating me into giving my money. And then you look into why they're doing that, and you realize that, like, oh yeah, this isn't really a biblical concept at all. This has been completely manipulated and twisted and turned. And so yeah, it was started off with the process of looking at liturgy first of all, and then it started going into looking at theology.
No, I like that, because I think that you're also like, you're kind of showing that dividing line between like the theology of what we believe or what we profess that we believe, and then there's like the theology of what we actually do.
Right. Yeah.
Because we can say what we believe all we want, but if our actions say otherwise, that really is the theology that we're walking through.
Right.
And I know, and I want you to unpack this somewhat. And this comes from your book. I'll read this quote, and I really enjoyed this. So deep down, I believe most of us are not sure what we believe, no matter how hard we try to convince ourselves and those around us otherwise. And that is okay.
Yeah, that was the most freeing thing when I can't even remember what exactly the belief was, but it's happened time and time again where I was like, I don't think I believe, theological idea, X, Y, or Z. And then I would sit with it for a while. I'd question, I'd look at it from all angles. And then I would finally get to, but I don't think I really believe in that idea. And then I'd be, looking over my shoulder for lightning to strike. I was also grew up in the world where, like, if you got a flat tire, I would look and be like, oh, it's probably because there's sin in my life somewhere and God's punishing me, right? This is my evangelical mindset I was in. So when I started kind of leaving some of these core beliefs behind, or in the very least just being uncertain about them, I was afraid that something in my life was going to change. And then I realized nothing in my life is changing. These are all ideas that are stuck in my head. It's not affecting the way I treat the people around me. It's not affecting my relationships. It's not affecting my job. It's not affecting anything. It's just these okay, I believe that. I don't know. It's the same thing. Like, how do colorblind people make it through like the world? Like they're seeing different colors than we are, but it's not really affecting their day-to-day life. And that, when I kind of had that realization, it was really freeing that I don't need to, I'll hold my own personal beliefs about heaven and the afterlife, but in a traditional sense, I don't think that I need to hold the right set of beliefs in order to make it into heaven or to make some God happy with me. I think that if there is a heaven and that is the way that it works, what's more important is like, how did I treat the people around me? Mm-hmm. I could, if there's a gun to my head and said, "Do you believe in God?" and I say, "No." But I go around and I have the love of the Christ in me, and I'm going around and I'm like showing people that love and treating people with compassion. Like that, I think is what matters. Even if I say I don't believe in God, it's like, well, yeah, I don't know. I could go on and on about that, but.
Well, so
yeah.
you went, and so what I like what happened in the midst of your story. So you're going through this process of deconstructing, of really kind of owning your doubts, and being able to let them breathe and have space and not necessarily bury them or push them away. And you're doing this with one of your friends, in the process of being able to kind of envision, what does it look like to have an authentic community, with all of these things still being held in your hands. And I know, especially in church circles, you hear these stupid buzzwords like authentic community. We have authentic community here because we've done the litmus test. We are verified, 98% authentic by the health code.
Yeah.
Whatever the hell that means. But we throw that around there. But as I'm reading through what you're talking about, this is something that you have strived to do, in that, to be able to lean into vulnerability. Like the vulnerabilities you mentioned earlier, too, that you struggled with, is saying, I'm depressed. I feel like crap. I'm at church. This should be a place where I'm depressed and feel like crap. And this should be a place where I should be. That should be like helping me right now. And by and large, you saw like that not happening over and over again. And so now, I want you just to speak somewhat into what it takes to have a authentic community where vulnerability is a place and vulnerability is championed. Where messiness is okay.
Yeah, what it takes is having a wife who is an empath and has taught me how to not ignore all my emotions. It's a lot. There's a lot of it's hard to do. I mean, there's things that happen on a Sunday morning that are incredibly awkward and incredibly uncomfortable, and everything inside me says to speak up and fill the silence that is happening in the room, while there's people in the room who are crying and sharing their story about something bad that's happened in their life. In order to have authentic community, you need to be able to hit on the full spectrum of human emotions. There can't be any emotion that is off limits, are not allowed. I have this theory that if you know someone for 10 years and they only share the positives and their celebrations with you, and then a second person, you know them for 10 days, but they share their low points with you, I really believe you'll know that person that you've known for 10 days way better than the person that you've known for 10 years, but only on the surface. And so, authentic community, if there is any part of you that you feel like you have to hide or that isn't welcome, then there's no connection that's going to happen. You're not going to build relationships without vulnerability. You're not going to have anything authentic when people have to pretend. I mean, those two words are antonyms. So like that just it's something that we have analyzed our liturgy for, and we've looked at different aspects of what we do, and we've asked ourselves the questions of like, does this part of our service encourage or discourage vulnerability? Does it make it seem like be one set of beliefs or one way of being is the only acceptable way, or do we have things where we actually honor the people in our room that feel like they don't necessarily fit in, or they feel like they don't fit into, society as a whole? How can we honor people in their, sorrow and their pain? How can we make space for that? And where in our liturgy is where and what in our liturgy is helping us and hurting us in that aspect?
So going through this journey, and especially continuing to be a pastor in the midst of all this, which I think is a wonderful thing, where you're able to still be able to continue to wrestle, because so often I feel like being a pastor is synonymous for faking it. You know what I mean, or having like a persona where you know that you're supposed to be the holy man on the stage, who is unblemished and is someone that's like who everyone else should aspire to be. Doing all of this and being able to run a church community, how has this whole process of deconstruction and embracing vulnerability, how has it changed your metrics for success, or for how you view success and things of that nature?
Yeah, that was early on. So this is like a little bit of where we've always been as a church. The church has been around for about 10 years, but I've been a part of it. It was looked drastically different when it started. But one thing that happened when it started, it was very always transparent about its finances, which kind of drew me to it when I first came. And so in that same, to honor that transparency, I'll be transparent with you that when I came 5 years ago, our budget was, I think it was somewhere just shy of $7,000 a month, which in the church world is hardly anything at all. There's a church in our area that has a $5 million a year budget, to give people an idea if they're not familiar. Also, I think I tell a story in the book. The church that Foursquare church that I was at spent $72,000 a year on janitorial supplies one year. So they spent more than us just on like toilet paper and paper towels. But so that was 5 years ago. We had a budget of $7,000. Our budget this year, or each month for this year is $1,900 a month. And even then, I think we're probably going to, by the end of the year, it's going to be cut even further. So really early on, I say all that to say, as we started trying to change our liturgy to be more welcoming to people who maybe aren't like traditional Christians, that means that all of our success metrics that we used to measure by, we were failing each one. Like we were not successful by the traditional church metrics of measuring attendance, measuring our budget, and having like a big building that's in a good condition. Using those metrics, we were failing in every way possible. So we had to start. That's really discouraging. Also, by the way, have since left the denomination that we were in, because we had to report back to them every month numbers, and they would be really worried about us, and we'd have meetings with the denomination, and they would tell us oh, here's some strategies to get your numbers up, here's some strategy. Like it was all pushing us to do
business.
Yes. Yes, it was. Yeah. And so we started looking at different ways to measure that. So for example, we have like 4 or 5 different events that happen throughout the month. 2 of them happen weekly. 2 of them happen bi-weekly. So we have like all these small pockets of gatherings that happen, and those gatherings have very little crossover. And so we were sending, we were measuring just our Sunday morning attendance. And then we realized, it's actually like double that, because we have all these other people that we're engaging with on a regular basis, but they don't show up on Sunday morning. Which, when you say it, when I say it out loud, to me, it's like, oh wow, that sounds really healthy. That you have meetings throughout the week that people are finding meaningful, aside from a Sunday morning service. But yeah, then also budget. Obviously, when you have people who come to church who are not lifelong Christians, they don't understand the concept of tithing. They don't they don't necessarily give their or give their money away. And if they do, we've had lots of people that come and they give loads of money away. It's just not to the church. It's to a soup kitchen or a food pantry, or helping their friend pay their car bill. It's like very generous people, but they just giving it to the church isn't a thing that they're used to doing. The same thing, if that's the case, if you're going to have non-traditional people attend your church, and not give money and not show up every Sunday, then a building basically becomes a that's not an option anymore. So we rent a co-working space, which is where I'm sitting right now, that has a big enough shared space that we can kind of repurpose it on Sunday mornings. But yeah, that's kind of the journey that we went on for Metrics.
For you, like, how have, and you can choose to answer this however you want to. But
okay.
through this journey, like, how has your perspective, your priorities, and your theology changed through all of this? Through all this
perspective,
perspective, priorities, and theology.
Yeah, I think perspective and I think they all probably tie together. And if I had enough time, I would, put it together in one cohesive thought. But perspective wise and priorities, I think those go together pretty well. Like I definitely, so the nice thing when you're free of a budget and you're free of a building and free of traditional church members is you can actually email your church on Saturday and say, hey, I'm exhausted. We're not going to have church tomorrow morning. And then sometimes people say, oh my gosh, I am too. I'm glad that we're not having service tomorrow, right? And they all, and this actually happened not that long ago, and we talked about it the next Sunday, and they were like, we were so happy that you took care of yourself and didn't come and lead this gathering and burn yourself out. Like they were genuinely happy for me that I made that decision. So as far as priorities go, really putting people first versus the machine of the church, and that includes myself and my family too. I remember missing Thanksgiving dinners and Christmas dinners because I was on the worship team and I had to prepare for the service that upcoming Saturday or Sunday. So yeah, that's definitely one way that my priorities have shifted, and also my priorities of just figuring. I used to be so obsessed about figuring out what. And I would read every Josh McDowell book, and I would read every apologetics book possible. And now those conversations, a lot of times, they're kind of boring, to be honest. I don't necessarily find them that, it's kind of like, oh, okay, that's what you believe. Cool. Let's move on to other things. How was your week? How are you doing? How do you feel about life? How do you feel about your job or whatever? Asking a little bit more meaningful questions. As far as my theology goes, to put it as succinct as possible, is just a way more open theology. I definitely still enjoy the stories of Jesus, and I think they're very important stories. I definitely see everything a lot less literal than I used to. But yeah, at the same time, we talked at the beginning about reconstruction. I used to spend a lot more time worrying about reconstruction and trying to nail down this real set of my new set of beliefs. And I, in the last couple of months, I've given myself the freedom to just kind of, pause on that and hit the brakes and just be okay with not knowing the answers to everything. But more if you were to look at my life and add up all the time that I spent trying to figure out what I believe, it'd be hours, thousands and thousands of hours that I've spent with my nose in a book that I could have been spent helping a friend out or having a conversation. I could have been so much better. And not to say that those kind of conversations I don't think they're useless. I think they are important. Our theology a lot of times does affect what we do and how we behave. I'm not trying to belittle those conversations in a larger picture, but for me personally, it's just not really where I'm at right now.
So what is one bit of advice that you would give to people that may be listening out there that are saying that they're in a position like you were when you began to question stuff, when you began to say, is there more to this Jesus thing than what I'm seeing here in church? I'm beginning to doubt certain parts of the machine. What advice would you give to folks that are in that place?
Two things. One is I'm not trying to undermine any leadership that you're underneath, and like I do think that those structures do serve a purpose in certain scenarios. But I would challenge people to consider how narrow the scope is of the resources that are being especially if it's just the Bible on Sunday mornings. But like the authors that are mentioned on Sunday morning, the books that are for sale, if you have a bookshop or a church library, I would really challenge you to look at how narrow the scope of those resources are. There's very few voices, and there's very few. I think 100% intentionally, there's very little disagreement between those voices. They all are pretty much, it's an echo chamber. They're saying the exact same thing. So I would challenge you just to find different resources and read people, even if you know you're going to disagree or you think you're going to disagree with 100% of it. Just pick up a book and read a different perspective. It's the same thing if you're listening to this and you've ever traveled outside of the US. It's a life-changing experience. It's like, oh my gosh, like my world is so small. My perspective was so small. So that's one thing I would challenge you to widen your perspective. And then the second thing is, if you are kind of already past that and you feel alone, I would just challenge you to look for groups of people that affirm who you are and affirm where you're at on this journey, and groups of people that don't make you feel like you have to hide those questions. There's so many people who have come to our church who literally, you could tell they were like bursting at the seams. Like, I've been dying to ask these questions and have these conversations, but I can't talk to my other church. I can't talk to them about these things. Like those, you're not alone if you have all those questions. The way that paradigm works is you have to pretend like you don't have questions. And so you're in a room of 100 people all thinking the exact same question, but they can't say it out loud. So that's the other thing is, I would say you're not alone. And if you just do a little bit of work, I think you could find a community, even if it's nothing formal. If it's, you have to text a few people and get together on your own, I think you can find a community of people that affirm who you are and where you're at in your journey.
Those are good words. Those are good words there. So Brandon, if people want to find out more about you, if people want to find your book, Meaningful Again, where do they go?
Yes, so I have a website, www.meaningfulagain.com. If you go there, it's just going to give you more or less just going to give you a link to Amazon. So you could also just type that into Amazon if you want. So I have the ebook and I have the paperback that you could buy. I am fairly active on social media, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. My Twitter is @BC the Heretic, and then my Instagram is at Brandon Carlton CC, and then you can find me on Facebook too. Feel free to reach out and befriend me. I'm happy to have a conversation about any of this. Speaking of being alone, if you feel like you're alone and you want someone to talk to, I'm more than happy to have a discussion with you about anything.
Well, Brandon, thank you so much for your time and for being on the show again. And I'd love to have you back sometime to talk more about this, a little more in depth about deconstruction and all of that process too. So thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on, and thank you for doing what you do. I think it's really, again, speaking of feeling lonely, podcasts like these had made me feel less lonely many a time. So thank you for what you do, man.
Well, that's all the time we've got this week here at Snarky Faith Radio. And just a reminder that as we finish this broadcast, you can also catch this show and past shows on podcast at www.snarkyfaith.com. Much thanks to Brandon for being on the show this week. And typically, how I end this show is I send you off with a bit of a blessing. Now, I will continue to do that this week, but I wanted to, because Brandon mentioned earlier, and he talks about it more in his book, about creating liturgy that speaks to your community and that speaks into the space you have here. So in the interview, I had Brandon actually read us some liturgy to send us out. So I will leave you with Brandon as I send you off with the holiest amount of grace and snark and peace. So here's Brandon.
For anyone here who has doubt and who is uncertain, for any of us unsure of what we believe about God, we honor your doubts and we acknowledge our own. For anyone here who feels lost or in between two places, we acknowledge how lonely that must feel. And for anyone here who is experiencing any pain, sorrow, grief, depression, we are not here to chase it away. We are not here to promise that religion will make it go away. We are here to sit alongside you in your sorrow. May you feel that you belong.
WCOM is listener-supported community radio, and Snarky Faith is only possible through our sponsors. Lumen, a spiritual community of seekers, sojourners, question-askers, doubters, and skeptics, is a collective of fellow travelers that embrace the truth that all of life is sacred, hope is real, and tomorrow can be a better day than today. All are welcome. You can find more information at www.lumencommunities.com.